Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for inviting me to speak this evening. I'm happy to be here. I am going to go ahead, and now that you've all seen my face, I'm going to turn off my video because sometimes my computer gets a little upset and I want to make sure that the audio is good. All right. So get this pulled up. All right. And okay, great. Thank you for that. Because, you know, once you get into this mode, I can't see any of you. All right. So I will just jump right into it here. Like Kirsten said, my name is Kara Barron, and I am one of the founders of a brand new nonprofit called the Desert Seed Resource Center. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about collecting wild seed for restoration and conservation, as Kirsten mentioned, and kind of some issues that happen with collecting wild seed and how that's being addressed and how Desert Seed Resource Center kind of plays into all that. So firstly, and this is, I also want to preface this with, this is a general overview. So this isn't going to get really technical. So if some of you already know this information, just bear with me. I want to make sure that we're taking everybody along for the ride. So in case you aren't already familiar, you know, the first question is why do we collect wild seed? Well, first of all, right now is unfortunately in Flagstaff, you know, fires. Now, of course, Flagstaff ponderosa pine forests are fire adapted, so it's not necessarily always an issue for fires in the Flagstaff area, but in the desert Southwest, down where I am, so I'm based out of Safford, Arizona, and grew up in Phoenix. So grew up in the Sonoran Desert, and now I'm living in that transition zone between the Sonoran and Chihuahuan. And unlike ponderosa pine forests, our deserts are not fire adapted. So basically what that means is many don't have the ability to resprout, and some of the fires that we're experiencing are burning up. They can burn up the seed bank itself because the seeds can't handle it. They can't handle the heat. So this is a good reason to collect seed. Another one is invasive species competition. So sometimes when you're doing restoration projects, you've removed invasive species and you need to get some plants on the land to help compete against those species so that they don't just come back. So that's another great reason to collect wild seed. Also for mitigation, and because of land use change, fallow fields might not have a seed bank because they've been farmed for a long time, and that might be a good way to get seed back on the land, is to use wild collected seed. Mining and things like that, also those areas require mitigation at certain points, and so wild seed can be used for that. Now, mind you, this is a tool in the toolbox for restoration and conservation, and not the only way to do things, and not always the appropriate way to do things. But again, this is just an overview of why we might do it. And last but definitely not least, conservation. So for those of you who have never seen this building before, this is in the permafrost in Northern Europe, and it's called Svalbard. And it is basically a, quote, doomsday seed vault that many countries have deposited seed collections into just in case. So in the United States, if you are not aware, we have a national seed collection program that is run by the Bureau of Land Management. And this started in 2001 as a partnership between Kew Garden in the UK and the Bureau of Land Management. And to date, there's been more than 26,000 collections made, and there are crews out there right now doing collections over the summer in different places throughout the United States. So very robust. We have our own, quote, doomsday seed vault in Fort Collins, Colorado, where most of these collections are stored. And the BLM, their Seeds of Success program, lays out protocols for how to collect seed in a sustainable manner and to ensure genetic diversity. And down at the bottom here, there is a link, and I'll make sure that maybe that gets in the chat, or that we can pass this out afterward, because this is publicly available information if you go to this website. And so if you're interested in how to collect seed and how to do it in a sustainable manner and in a way that helps the land instead of hurting it and ensures restoration success, this is a really great one to follow. So the collections that BLM has, they can be used for research as needed. A portion of them are, of course, kept in conservation, but you can request small parts of those if needed. So a lot of people, some of you, I should say, may have come because you're hoping to learn how to wild collect seed. Maybe it's something that you like to do. You want to forage, you want to make some collections, maybe for your yard or something like that, which is wonderful. And I do highly encourage you to take a look at those Seeds of Success protocols. The collections that are done for restoration and conservation, they have very special considerations. You might go out for a hike and see an ironwood tree or something and grab a seed pod and put it in your pocket, no harm, no foul, nobody saw. I always encourage people to get permits if they're going to do any collection, though. That's always a good practice. But when you're collecting for conservation, you want to think about genetic diversity and making sure you capture as much of that as possible. And also, if you are a restoration practitioner and you have a project and you want to be getting seed or getting plants for your project that are adapted to the region that you are doing your project in. And so there is definitely some research being done showing that more locally collected materials are better long-term for long-term success of restoration projects. And again, leaving wild populations intact. So you don't want to be over collecting. Those are things that are really important to think about. So when you're collecting for conservation, again, you might have a project and your neighbor Sally says, hey, you want some mesquite? I have this giant mesquite tree and there's so much seed on it that should cover your whole project area. And she's probably right, because I'm sure many of you have seen, a giant tree with tons of seed on it. And depending on the size of your project, that might very well be, but is that really the best idea? And I'm going to tell you right now that if you're trying to do long-term, restore an area long-term, using just one plant is not going to get you the genetic diversity that you need. And that is really important for your project. So you want to go out and collect evenly and throughout large populations of the plants that you need. The BLM recommends between 30 and 50 at a minimum plants in a population before you even think about collecting them. And again, that's to maintain the integrity of the wild populations too. You don't want to collect from them and then not be able to, or that population isn't able to sustain itself long-term. And an even better practice is to go throughout a region and collect from multiple populations of the species that you are looking for. This isn't always something that is easy to do if you have your own project, but unfortunately, seeds in this quantity and maybe just from a locally adapted standpoint aren't always available for people when they have these projects that they want to do. So other considerations when you are collecting is to collect evenly over the population, getting thinking about those microclimates in a population, making sure you're getting edges, because again, genetic diversity, you want to make sure that you get as much of that as possible. And also you have to be aware of your human bias if you're collecting for conservation. We tend to gravitate, if you will, toward the bigger, showier plants. But those little scraggly plants have genetics in them that could be just as important, if not more important, at a later date for the area that those seeds might be destined for. So it's very important. Rather than collecting a bunch from one plant and a few from another, collecting a few from each plant. And the BLM recommends that you collect no more than 20% of the ripe seed from a population on any given collection day. So that is really important. And depending on the population that you're looking at, you might not be getting a lot of seed from that. And if you're on Forest Service land, sometimes it's even more strict. Some other agencies are 10%. So why is it important? Or, you know, why is this important, right? So creosote bush, for example, versus butterfly weed. Creosote bush, whenever you see a creosote flat, there's usually thousands of plants. Now these are clonal, so it might not be the best example ever, but collecting 20% of ripe seed on any given day for creosote bush, no big deal. You could probably cover acres with that. But on the other hand, butterfly weed or Asclepias tuberosa, you know, you're lucky if you can find 10 plants near each other. And, you know, and if you collect too much, those plants may not be able to last there long term, because the germination rate for any given species can be, you know, wild species especially, can be quite low. And so you want to be just really mindful if you're out there and collecting. So, you know, to bring it to the point, you know, the issue that I want to talk about is that wild seed is not enough. There are acres and acres burned and otherwise degraded that need rehabilitation or need restoration, and land managers don't have the material that they need. And even if we could send crews out there wild collecting every single day, there's still not enough seed to be had without compromising the wild populations. And this became apparent as far back as 2015, and I'm sure it was much further back than that. But in 2015, the Plant Conservation Alliance released this national seed strategy. So it's a big enough concern for land managers that there is a framework now that strives to deal with this issue. And the Plant Conservation Alliance is a group of agencies, NGOs, and other organizations that kind of put together, again, a framework with 4 different goals. And they are basically what needs to be done so that we can make sure that there's enough seed for projects at scale. And this is another document that is publicly available on the Forest Service website, and another one that we'll make sure that you have either in the chat or we'll get that to you afterward. So one answer to this, and probably the best one we have to date, is farming for conservation. So another term for this would be seed amplification fields. So we take that wild seed of Asclepias tuberosa that we collected, and maybe we only got, you know, 50 seeds or something like that, a few grams, and you put it in a seed amplification field, and then you can harvest all the seed from those plants, and it's and then you can use that in projects. So conservation farming, though, there are definitely some things that need to be worked out, a lot of research that still needs to be done, and some really interesting and important considerations to take into account when you're thinking about conservation farming versus traditional farming. Now, I believe it was on April 13th, I went to a webinar through the Society for Ecological Restoration, and there was a talk on farming for conservation, which was really interesting. And so these points I've kind of taken away from them and thought it would be kind of cool to point out here. Traditional farming, when you think about it, uniformity is what you want. You want things that are easy to germinate. You can harvest them all in one go, and you choose different traits that are important or economically important for one reason or another, and you keep back those plants so that they can be replanted, right? So through that, humans do select for different genetics. We, in our own way, are producing genetically modified organisms, right? And eventually, with many of our crops, these plants rely on humans for continued cultivation. They wouldn't survive in the wild. Now, when you're farming, if you're going to farm for conservation, it's really important that genetic diversity is top of mind. In some species have dormancy that might need to be broken. And so if you just go out and put seeds in the field and not know whether or not there's dormancy or that there's potential for dormancy breaking that needs to be done, you might get a low germination rate. And if you just go on with your life and collect from those seeds, you've just done a huge selection, right? You've already kind of altered what's going to go back out into the land. So it's important to know what you're dealing with and know how to get it in there with as little human-based selection as possible. Another issue or potential issue with conservation farming versus traditional is seeds don't all ripen at the same time. You have different stages at different times throughout the growing season where seeds ripen. So you might have to go out there 2 or 3 times to get everything. And that's also important to do because, again, that there's genetic diversity in that needs to be captured. So you want to avoid selection at all costs. And it seems like there's all kinds of traps, right? So there's still research to be done, but this is something that seems very promising overall for getting the seeds amplified so that we're not over collecting from our wild populations. And again, it's very important that those plants thrive without human intervention over the long term. So anything we do could compromise that, and we don't want to do that. So there are some great regional programs doing research, dabbling in seed amplification, genetics research, common garden studies, etc., to help bring this into a reality, right? And you may know about some of these programs already, but these are the ones that work. These are ones that work in Arizona. There are definitely other programs, but I wanted to focus on Arizona. So there's a Colorado Plateau Native Plant Program run by Adrian Pilmanis of the Bureau of Land Management. And they are doing some really great work up there, and they're one of the older plant programs. The Southwest Seed Partnership out of Santa Fe, that's run by the Institute of Applied Ecology, and Melanie Geisler is their director, and they are a really great leader in working with farmers in New Mexico and into Arizona a little bit. The Mojave Desert Native Plant Program is another Bureau of Land Management program that focuses on the Mojave. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that they focus mostly on California, but I'm sure that the rest of the Mojave also benefits from that. The Dene Native Plants Program, the Navajo Nation has their own program, which is wonderful. It's a new program, but I've heard they're doing really great things up there. And then the Madrean Archipelago in southeastern Arizona has its own plant partnership. So, you take a look at the map. So here's a map of Arizona, and, you got the Mojave Desert, the MDNPP, the Colorado Plateau, the CPNPP, the Dene, so DNPP, the Southwest Seed Partnership, and somehow I put an M in there. I'm not sure what happened there. And then there's the map group. And as you can see here, there's a glaring omission. The Desert Southwest does not have its own regional program right now. And there's definitely whisperings and talking over the last few years of a need for a regional program. There are local efforts, including the Sonoran Seed Collaborative, and that's run by the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance, as well as a small group that's under the umbrella of CASCA, the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance. Maricopa County Parks is also has a little seed amplification field at the Cave Creek Regional Park, and they're just getting started. Maricopa County Flood Control District has been growing its own plants for quite a while now. Pima County has a plant program where they do salvage, and I think they grow their own for their own projects too a little bit, but they have a non-compete clause, so what they do is limited, but they definitely do a lot of salvage there in Pima County. And then last but definitely not least, he's been at it for a very long time, is Gary Muskaric. He is a seed collector, and if you get seeds from that are sourced from Arizona, most likely you're getting them from Desert Seed Source, which is his company. He's been doing great things for many years. So the Central Arizona Conservation Alliance, CASCA for short, put together the ROS, which is their regional open space strategy, and it's for Maricopa County mostly, but it includes some of Pinal County as well. And they modeled their strategic plan a little bit after the National Seed Strategy. So they also have 4 goals. And goal number 2 is to sustain and restore. And under that, I took a little excerpt of this. And if you see the highlighted area, they came together, they did working groups. This came together over, I believe it was a year and a half or so. And many people worked on this. And they came to the conclusion that the ability of park managers to effectively mitigate degradation, ensure positive user experience, and apply principles of sustainable natural resource management depends upon, among other things, access to genetically appropriate native plant materials. And then they go on to say that developing these capacities requires coordination and collaboration on a regional scale. So there's definitely a need. And the new nonprofit, so Desert Seed Resource Center, and I know it sounds especially, and I never really thought of it until I was putting together this presentation. Our name is a little bit close to Gary Muscaric's company's name, so we'll see where that goes in the future. But for now, we are definitely the Desert Seed Resource Center. And we were incorporated back in November, and we got our 501c3 status in March. And we are hoping to fill that niche. Our goal is to fill that niche of the Desert Southwest, to increase the availability of native plant materials for conservation of Desert Southwest through research, collaboration, and education. And our vision is to create a thriving, regionally appropriate native plant material market for the Desert Southwest. So we really hope to be a hub for information, etc. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So right now we have a couple of projects that are preliminarily in the works, and we're really excited about this, and we can't wait to get these things started. So we have a seed orchard, which is a seed amplification field that we're working on with Gila Watershed Partnership, which is where I work right now, along with Eastern Arizona College. We have a plot on Discovery Park campus that's a satellite campus of Eastern Arizona College in Safford, and they have at least 100 acres out there, and they have set aside a few for us to do some experiments. And so we're working with biology students at EAC to start developing some protocols for a couple of species. So that's really exciting. And then I've also been in talks with the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy in Scottsdale to help them develop a seed collection and restoration plan for about 72 acres that they would like to rehabilitate. So we're really excited to get started. To share with you a little bit more, we have some short-term and long-term goals so that you're more familiar with what we hope to do. And first things first, we have to secure funding partners in space. So we're definitely working on that right now. And then our next step is to create a short list of target species using the resources we have. And then, of course, acquiring collections of those species so we can begin developing protocols for farming. Long-term goals, we want to acquire facilities so that we can store seeds medium term for partners of ours. And make sure that they're, available for emergency use. That's the ultimate goal. And we'd also like to create a program to teach conservation farming eventually. And again, act as a hub and an information clearinghouse for seed growers and users in the region. So that is, in a nutshell, kind of what we do. We're really hoping to maybe, to find more partners and to find funding. So if you're interested in getting involved, I would love to talk to you more, or if you have anybody I need to talk to or papers you need that I should be reading, I welcome them. And with that, I thank you. We have our own website, and you can reach us at there, or you can email us at info@desertseeds.org. I think you're still muted, Kristen. There you go.
Oh, thank you very much, Kara. That's really exciting. And I'm really happy that you're able to start that 501c3. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers.